We'll walk through that as well as the access port Modbus communications device. And we'll wrap up at the end with some new future communication capabilities with some active development that is currently in process, and give you some additional options on to learn about OutBack product and training and such. Hopefully we'll have some time for answers and questions at the end. Please feel free to chime in during the presentation. Phil will be monitoring any chats that come across, any questions during the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as we go. So first we'll jump into the mate, like I said before, this system control device. It was really the first control device for OutBack. When it was first introduced, it was visionary for its time. Really had unlimited programming capability and one of the only units on the market at the time that could do what it could do. Originally developed to really program and monitor inverters, but quickly became burdened with more tasks as our systems became more complex in doing a charge controller, our battery monitor and such. And so quickly this unit became outdated, and the memory, the bandwidth of the unit was quickly used. So I wanted to give you some discussion points on this. You know, the good thing about the mate is the unlimited functionality. It has over 480 screens to be used with the programming. You can set up anything from battery types, battery and charging profiles, automatic generator starting, really unlimited capability. But also the bad part of the mate as well is it has over 480 screens to learn. And that's one of the real limitations of this unit. If you look at the buttons on the right hand of the screen here, what we call our hotkeys, is really limited in function and how you can access the information because of the user interface. And it was until you learned that decision tree or the navigation and identifying data was quite time consuming. Believe it or not, things like voltage and amperage, which need to be referenced almost simultaneously, were quite often reporting in two separate areas. So you would run through different screens going up and down trying to access the information because it wouldn't report on the same screen. So that's just some of the limitations to the initial version of the mate. I should also mention that for those that don't know OutBack in the full range, when we say mate and mate 2, really it's this version here and this version here. The hardware components is exactly the same. It's really just a surface mount versus a flush mount and a color difference. So the name might imply a next generation type of a mate with the mate 2, but really the only difference is the flush mount. Some more information on the actual buttons, like I mentioned earlier. You can see that the small screen here, it's really limited in the amount of data that we can put into this area. But you would go from your AC in, your hotkey, and your hotkey for your inverter buttons, and you could do things like your AC input control, charger control, generator start, charger mode control, and things like that, and quickly, easily access your inverter off and on and reset errors and such. But again, the process to getting there can be quite cumbersome. So moving on to the Mate 3, rolling right into it, I'll spend a little bit more time on the Mate 3 just because it's a more recent device, and I want to spend some time talking about the features that might not be so obvious for first-time users or even existing users. So when OutBack first talked about revamping the Mate, we laid out some design constraints, and we wanted to have the unit upgradable, really smart, intuitive, easy user interface, and easier to read display. And if you can notice, just quickly, you can see on the right-hand side just how much more information is captured in the new screen versus the Mate. Just you get a better snapshot on one screen of what the system is doing. So another thing that we'll go through is the graphical display, which we had not had in the Mate, and then system configuration wizard, which is I can't explain how important or how useful this is in terms of reducing system setup time by answering a handful of questions to set up a system, and we'll program via just some simple questions. Internet enabled, I'll review that with you later as well on later screens, and multi-level user access and passwords. One of the main upgrades just in the display, as you can see on the left and right here, as you can see the screen is being consolidated immensely with words. We went with the icon approach. So if you notice on the left-hand side, you'll see that the battery voltage not only reports the actual battery voltage, but it also signifies as if it's going up or down. So for instance, we are inverting 1.5 kW, which is going into the battery. So status as well as trend, which is hugely important. When you look at like some of the competitors out there, they'll report the status, but the trend is somewhat hard or difficult to identify. So just a general overview of going to the icon display. One of the biggest upgrades, and I mentioned this earlier, is the introduction of the multiple hotkeys. So we have 5 here with a favorites hotkey, and really that allows for what we were going for is a one-touch snapshot of your system. So meaning you push the inverter button and you automatically have a snapshot of what the system is doing. No more navigating through multiple screens and a decision tree to get to the information you want. And one example of that is to go to the screen here, for instance. When you hit inverter, what you see is information of it's the mode, the input, output, the power it's being produced, load, and your battery voltage in all one square snapshot. Likewise, if you go into the generator, you hit generator button, you get the status, quick status of what the generator is, but then even more importantly, you can see things like when the last time it was run, you have a timestamp, what charging occurred, state of charge, and very useful information. I won't go through each one of these buttons, but the takeaway from this is the Mate 3 was simplified in terms of if you want to see what the inverter's doing, you hit the button. If you want to see what the charger's doing, you hit the button. Events, you hit the events, and then you have a status of all the different either errors or warnings that occurred for easy diagnosis or get a sense of what's going on in the system. Won't spend too much time on this, but introduction of graphing. Show the 6-hour increments here, but there's unlimited graphs that you can pull. Some of the ones that are most frequently used are your FNDC, your state of charge, your battery graph, of course all your inverter settings and charge controller. What we found is many people like to have the visual reference, of course, that they use these soft keys, which are down below, and you can actually program these to be additional favorite buttons to pull up a graph that you might reference quite often. Installer settings. One of the biggest feedback coming from the sales and installer community was that there was some concern around what we call the tinkeritis, and I think we can all have some story or some example where user, homeowner gets in and is tinkering around with their system and maybe create unwarranted issues that did not need to be there just because of the level of command and control you have through this type of communication device. So what we've done is set up a user access level and where you can set the different types of control that you might want to have for a specific individual, which was very well received. Configuration wizard I mentioned earlier easily programs the system after a few quick answers, and we'll kind of run through this. So primary information, the system type, voltage, ray wattage, battery type, and then you go into the battery and charging parameters and AC configuration. The great thing about this is when you go in and you enter this information, and let's say you have a multiple device system, multiple inverters, charge controllers. By answering these simple questions, it will program the entire system. So no longer the need to go into each individual inverter, charge controller, or device in the system. It's automatically programmed through the configuration wizard. A couple other points to note on this is that if you have an installation that becomes frequent, maybe using one of our FP1 systems or one of our new Radians, you can actually save these configurations in an SD card to be loaded into, for instance, next installation. So even cutting down the time to get the system up and running even less. Phil, are you there, Phil?
Yes, indeed, I am. Just was on mute.
I thought it would be also interesting to kind of share your story about the latest trip overseas and what you discovered in terms of information you can access on systems by integrating the Mate3, maybe a system that's already in the field, and being able to pull that data.
Yeah, good point, Paul. Yeah, in fact, one of the things that I've seen in my history with the Mate is the Mate really the original Mate only, well, it had no sense of time, it had no sense of history. There was no way to see the past. Once an event had passed, it may give you a warning or a error or a fault message to say that something had happened, but you couldn't, once that fault was cleared, then you could no longer see what had happened or when it happened. With the Mate3, we found even plugging it into an existing system that had been up and operational for many years, you could all of a sudden record, or you could see the history that was saved in the inverters and other devices going back through time. So just from a troubleshooting point of view, that was a huge benefit. Had no, I had not seen that before, and it caught me by surprise, but it was very, very handy.
Yep, great. So yeah, there's really, it's almost unlimited functionality with the Mate3 and what it can do. So quickly, the firmware is now upgradable, not only for the Mate3, but also the devices that are connected to the Mate3 in the system. And it's as easy as going on the website and downloading the file via the computer and onto an SD card, and then it can easily be upgradable. But here's just kind of a snapshot of the process that it would go through. So one of the unique features that we're looking to expand upon in the near future is the intuitive web interface. Currently, we have a easy-to-use web interface that is connected via Ethernet port on the back of the Mate3, which gives you just a snapshot, an even better resolution of the system status via a browser or internet type of connection. And so all the different comprehension and command of an entire system. And one thing to note is when I say we'll build upon this platform is currently it's only monitor, that there's no control function, but when I get into later in the presentations, we'll talk about the next evolution on having remote control and what that could possibly look like for OutBack. Ability to open multiple windows provides easy monitoring, troubleshooting, and then technical support. I can't explain how useful this is for the tech team to be able to dial in and easily see what's going on within a system and get down to a root cause or diagnosis of what might be going on in the system. Different ways that it can be hooked up, say direct. Obviously, you have the Mate3, which goes directly through Ethernet to your personal computer or router. Probably the most common, what we find is people are using the wireless to wireless. Mate3 is usually put somewhere in the garage or somewhere in an area where you're not going to want to run a long Ethernet cord inside of a house where computers are often used. So you'll have a universal Wi-Fi adapter, network adapter that you can buy really at any type of electronics store. $20, $30, and then that will sync to your wireless router and give you the free range to wirelessly access the system on your computer. But it just gives you different options of how you can connect into the Mate 3 via computer. So the example of the system status in a more blown up type of a display here. What I want to key in on is this screen here where we have, you'll notice on the left side where you have the ports. And so imagine you have a system of a larger size or even just multiple device system. The different ports will identify on the screen, so port 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be, and you can easily access and diagnose. So maybe one float voltage on a charge controller is at 27.2 and you notice that something's out of whack on port 3 because it's at 25, and that's easily identifiable because you'll see it in one quick snapshot. So just gives you an idea of the monitoring function of the Mate 3. We're going to switch gears here a little bit, and before we get into a couple new items that OutBack has launched within the last few months, I want to point out that these are really targeted towards your industrial type of customers, your industrial markets. And until some additional applications and software is developed, it won't go into the mainstream, your Joe homeowner and residential. And a lot of the information we'll provide here is really geared towards the industrial market. We've noticed strong growth worldwide. OutBack is known for the off-grid, the standalone grid hybrid, and that's really our bread and butter. And we know that the growth within the PV industry is really in battery-based, and performance is critical. And so the industrial market, and one of the terms we hear quite often is a solar on a stick. So maybe you have some asset up at a top of a mountaintop, or it's a flashing LED light, and it needs to be up and running 24/7, and it's an asset that has to be protected. That it becomes a very high demand for monitor and control functions to make sure that that is running at 100% 24/7. And one of the main reasons is obviously there's no power running up to these remote locations, and the ones that do have generators, that the diesel cost is quite expensive. So there's a large initiative for diesel reduction and other programs to get your OpEx down. But just some examples of where we're finding a lot of growth in the industrial market. So the Mate 3 USB, which is an option card. It's really this card right here that would install in your existing Mate 3, and it adds a USB port that will allow you to talk to a computer via USB and serial. And what that does is it provides the ability to access, monitor, and adjust your system on a PC. So if you think back to what I just talked about on the Ethernet port, you have an easy way to monitor and show a snapshot of what your system is doing. By adding and integrating the USB card, you now have a global system control and fine-tuning and control of a system. This unit here, it's compatible with Windows, Mac, and Linux. I put a note here about the isolated power provided by Mate 3. So for those of you that know the serial communications of the Mate device, this is different, that this card is now powered via the Mate 3, whereas before the other serial communications was powered via a PC, which had some inherent problems. So this is now isolated power, and we're scheduled to start shipping as of next week, actually. Diving a little bit further in terms of the intended use on the item, the Mate 3 or the serial communications can be captured in a few ways, and one is the serial capture program, which I've listed on the right-hand side. And it's a freeware, download on the web, and this is an example of real term, but there's really unlimited freewares that you can download to be able to talk serial on your computer. But as I mentioned before, going this route really takes it away from the mainstream, the Joe homeowner, because there is some advanced programming skills that are required. You have to assign a port, set the baud rate, and the read and write serial command prompts isn't necessarily intuitive for a Joe homeowner, and I'll show you on the right-hand side. So this is a page taken out of the Mate 3 USB manual in terms of the type of serial commands that you would type in to get an achieved result. So it's not something where it's a plug-and-play type of a unit. There would be some, I guess, programming skills required until we have a third-party software or OutBack develops a software interface where that is where that could change. And there's companies like a Greenhouse PC, Wattplot, and others that have developed third-party software for our Mate device, and we expect at some time in the future that the same type of companies will also develop a software that will open up the market for the intended use on this item. But so until then, you're really limited in scope on intended markets. I should also say that these the serial communications can be integrated to an on-site SCADA network or something that's already established, that all the code is there. We provide the code online where you can write code to talk to the unit and integrate into an existing system. So access ports, so still going down the industrial command and control function, this is really the first device where we provide remote access and control. The difference on this unit is it uses a Modbus TCP protocol, which if I was to boil it down to the most simplest terms, it's really a ping and response type of communication protocol, and I don't want to go in too far, but essentially what it is you would dial in remotely to a system and ask, what is the status of the system, or what is the status of a device? And it comes back and it tells you 27 volts. And likewise, if you also want to change to 28 volts. And so it's just a single command and response type of protocol. It's very different than your serial command or other types of communication options. But without going too far into it, that's the simplest way I can describe it. So this one, as I said, gives you remote monitoring and control functions for your industrial and commercial applications. And the great thing about this is when we developed, we made it SunSpec compliant. So it speaks a common protocol with other solar companies within the industry. And again, this is one of those items where you will also need advanced programming skills to be able to integrate into systems. One of the ways you connected, and you have the access port here, you can either go into our hub device, which is really just our proprietary router information where you can connect multiple devices, or the other option is to go directly into a device if you only have a single device within your system. And this is an example of the command prompt. So again, it's a very, it's not an intuitive interface for a Joe homeowner to be able to interface and work with the unit. You will need to have some programming skills to get this up and working. The great thing is we've provided on the web, on OutBackPower.com, where we have program development kits. So integrating into an existing system or writing third-party apps, we provide all the information that is needed to integrate and get my cursor to work. But that type of information is all easily downloaded from the OutBack website. Here's an example of one of the individuals that took our API kit and did some software development, and they were able to extract the different information in a visual graphical interface. And so this is just one example of things that can be done with the software that's provided. And I should also mention that down the road in the near future that the information that's being captured by the either mate or the access port will be integrated into the OutBack range into where we have a web interface that is provided by OutBack that we will have available here as well. So what does this all mean? And I've kind of breezed through everything pretty quickly and wanted to bring it back up to a high level and give you a snapshot of the different communication options that OutBack is now offering. And so if you notice the differences here, so maybe we'll take an example of you have a installation that you need remote monitoring, and you need to be able to talk to it in serial communication. So what you would look at is you go, okay, so here's the remote monitoring and serial communications. You now know that with OutBack you have two options, and you can really boil it down to what our different capabilities are. The great thing, or the newest thing to notice on here, for those of you who know of the access port, we've now added the Radian compatibility. So access port has full command and control of all OutBack devices. There's no more limitations with that. So again, going into the future capabilities, and I'm really excited about this. We've heard from our customers loud and clear that remote monitoring and control capabilities is really the #1 priority. We've got the monitor part down, but really want to expand upon that and even have a more intuitive interface, and then of course add the control capability, which is the key. So we're actively developing the web interface along with mobile applications that will be launched in the near future. And the reason for bringing this up is to let the community know that OutBack is targeting communications as the next category for major development, and so you will be seeing continuous new things come out from OutBack in this category. I also want to mention that on the website and via YouTube, we have step-by-step videos online. So anytime you want to have more information for homeowners, installers, you can answer most of your common questions through the videos that are put together by our tech group. And so, like I said, you can either access them versus the OutBack website. We've got the resources pages here, or directly go to YouTube and to type in OutBack Tech, and you should get the list of videos that would be available. And that's basically it. I blew through it pretty quick. I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments that individuals might have, and we can go from there.
Folks, if you have questions, either raise your hand and I can unmute your phone, or if you prefer to, you can type it in on the chat box, and I'll try to feed the questions to Paul to answer as they come in. So, and let's see, there was a question about static IP addresses that with the Mate 3 web interface, what are the options if their internet feed doesn't handle static IP addresses?
That's a great question. I think, Phil, do you have more information on that one?
I think that can be handled by DNS registration. I know I ran into that in my home system where I wanted to be able to see it remotely, and so I was able to sign up with a DNS registration site. There's a number of free services that allow you to maintain that linkage.
Okay.
All right. And there was also a question about whether the access can be used in parallel with the Mate or Mate 3.
Great question. should point out that the access port is intended to be used in place of the mate or mate 3. So if you have like I'll scroll back to our screen here, if I can get back to it real quick. So the way that it works is that you either use your mate 3 or mate into the port here. So either your access port or your mate 3, they are not interchangeable or cannot be used simultaneously, just because they speak the different protocols, and basically that's the reason.
Okay. And there was also a question, the access can control the radians. Can they lower output via input with programming? So yes, the answer is with the access port, you can have direct control of all OutBack devices to change the settings on the fly. And just to elaborate a little bit in terms of what Paul was saying, we've always made the mate and now the mate 3, which is intended so that it has a user interface, touch buttons and a screen, so that you can go in and make adjustments at any time. But we have a number of customers in industrial applications where they wanted to have that direct linkage to the system without having to have well, to leave buttons and a display up on the mountaintop where they could have direct control. And so with the new firmware update to the access port, you can pretty much control pretty much anything in an OutBack system that you would do with a mate, you can now do remotely.
Yeah, really, just expand upon Phil's response there. Really, the only thing that you're limited on is the switching of the stacking. We felt that really, in order to switch the stacking, that someone should be on site and physically see which inverters or which charge controllers are on which line to be able to effectively switch that, because doing that remotely could create some serious problems. But other than that, any functionality that the mate 3 has in terms of adjusting parameters or functionalities that our inverters or charge controllers allow, you can do with the access port.
Mm-hmm. And there was also a question about whether if you could do, whether you would need a computer on site to monitor control with the access port. Do you want to speak to that, Paul?
Yeah, so computer on site. So you can, it's not on site, so it is a remote enabled device. So looking at the screen here, you can either plug in through a router, which goes into whether the internet or computer, but you have the option to do either. And you can also do things like you can FTP into the access port, you can access data logs, the SD card. It's a remote device, which is the first remote device that OutBack has come out with. So to answer the question, no, a PC does not need to be on site. It has remote capabilities.
Correct. Yeah. Anywhere that you've got an internet connection, you can establish a connection to the access port. All right. And there was a question about, is the Mate 3 compatible with older OutBack gear? And it is, we strongly believe in having a portfolio that is that works across the entire range of our products, and that not leaving things in the past. So the Mate 3 works with every FX that we've made. I run an old FX 2024 from back when before they had turbos in my home, and I have a Mate 3. It works fine with it. Let me see. There was a question about where the Mate 3 USB fits into the Mate 3. Do you want to show that slide again to show how
Sure.
it fits into the device?
So the way that it is intended to be installed is you have a series of 4 screws here which would be undone, and it allows the back panel of the Mate 3 to come apart. And essentially it slides onto a set of prongs here and here that's on the actual control board of the Mate 3. And the USB Type 2 USB port now comes out through a bottom portion of the Mate. So your USB cord would plug in from the bottom. Oops. One thing I will note is that the back casing has a knockout or an insert of thinner plastic material that you will have to score with like an X-Acto knife or something of that sort to notch out the area for where this Type 2 port would come through. But really it's about a 2-minute installation. I'm taking out the screws, sliding that on, and then scoring that panel, snapping it off, and then you're putting the screws back in.
There was a question about whether the Mate 3 configuration wizard can distinguish between battery types. I guess the answer to that is the Mate 3 does rely upon you knowing what batteries exist in the system. Now OutBack historically has allowed, well, we believe in giving installers the latitude to set the settings exactly how you want, rather than having pre-recorded solutions for, say, flooded versus AGM and having those be the only 2 choices. So you do set your set points appropriate for the battery that you have, whatever the battery manufacturer recommends. And let's see. Question about 10 ports on the hub. There is some work in progress on that. There will be something coming, but it's still down the road. There's a lot of factors we still need to work through in order to support larger systems.
Good thing is we are actively developing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, there was a question about explaining if you wanted to upgrade from an existing Mate to a Mate 3 and you wanted to be able to capture the original settings. And there's actually a configuration wizard that's used with the Mate 3 if you're setting up a system from scratch. If you are, say, initializing a system on day 1, you answer a few questions about what you have and what you want it to do, and then the Mate 3 can program all the devices and coordinates all the operation across the devices. There's also a system configuration that can be saved via the Mate 3. So you can take a Mate 3 and walk up to an existing system that's been up and running for any number of time, years or days, and record the system configuration of that system. And it will capture, well, essentially every programming set point that exists at the moment on all the OutBack devices connected. And then you can view that and, well, basically review it and see how things are programmed. If you want, you can then save that for historical data. If you want, you can also rerun the configuration wizard in order to adjust those settings, or individually dive in and change individual settings to however you like. The real key part is that for the first time, you can see all the settings of all the devices side by side and compare them quickly without having to do a lot of scrolling and navigating and even seeing things that are hidden in different regions which existed in the past. Now, it's really, you could even pull it up on one screen on your computer. I guess one other thing that's important to know is in the OutBack configurations, the system settings, for the most part, exist in the devices themselves. So charge controller settings are in the charge controller, and inverter settings are in the inverter itself. So you can go up and find out what they were set to by in the past, and then decide whether you want to make adjustments to those. And is there monitoring software for the system over the Ethernet now? There is no external software that needs to be provided. The Mate 3 serves its own web page. You can navigate to it from anywhere within the internet or intranet and be able to pull up the screen and see what's happening with the system. No other programs need to be purchased. Okay. And there was a question about the FlexNet DC. What's the relationship between the FlexNet DC and the Mate or Mate 3? The FlexNet DC is our DC system monitor. It is a 3-channel system monitor that can measure inputs and outputs on up to 3 channels, and then can turn that into battery state of charge, and can also tell you the history of the system and the performance over time. And that is, all of that information is gathered by and saved by the FlexNet DC, and then it's displayed by the Mate or Mate 3. And it works with both the Mate and Mate 2 and Mate 3. So in that case, the Mate becomes the device that you see what's happening and be able to navigate back through the historical records. Mm-hmm. Is there any other questions that we can answer? And if it is, you can either raise your hand or type it in on the chat box. Oh, there was a question about the price of the USB card.
$95 MSRP. It's a very low-cost option addition to the Mate 3.
And price on the access port?
$179 MSRP.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question about what data would be missing if you did not have the FlexNet DC. What the FlexNet DC shows you is what power has, well, the amp hours that have gone into your battery and come out of your battery and from all charging sources. So it really tells you the actual amp hour flow over time, and then therefore what the state of charge of your system is. Let me see, there was, shoot, I had just pressed the wrong button. There's a gentleman who had his hand raised, and I clicked the wrong button and knocked your hand down. I apologize. If you could just raise your hand, I can unmute you if you had a question. Okay, Dave Baker, I'm going to unmute you if you had a question. Dave, can you hear us?
Yep, yeah. Sure can. Can you hear us okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. DT had a question.
I've been asking you, this is Daryl Thayer, good old DT. Have you guys started to do any demand compensation where you look at the building load and you add, and through any of your controls you can add power to peak shave?
That's a really good question, Daryl, and that is certainly something we see as Yeah, it's one of many areas where battery-based systems can really show their value, and especially as we move into the new grid, the next grid, whatever you want to call it. But the energy is becoming much more decentralized and democratic, and we see a lot of potential for that, a lot of opportunity. So, and that's one of the areas why we created products to allow installers like yourself to do some astonishingly creative things, far more than we could ever think of by ourselves.
Thank you on that. Could I also ask, you can monitor the output of the inverter in watts. Is there any way you can control that presently, either by Modbus or through the mate channel?
The inverter's charging parameters tend to be via AC amps, so you'd have to do a pretty quick calculation, but you know if it's at 120 volts and it's 1 amp and it's 240 watts, so you can get some pretty good resolution that way.
I'm talking about power back to the grid. Can you control that?
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to never put any more, do you still have HSBC where you can never put power back to the grid but only put it into the...
Yep. Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. There have been people who have used the remote control capability when you have a control over both essentially the target voltage, which is normally cell RE, and the charger or the grid connection amps. When you can move the two of those side by side, then you can do very powerful things in terms of selling to the grid or absorbing from the grid. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And people have successfully been doing that, yes.
Okay. I've got a system that may want that features. Do you have that up on your website, or should I contact you directly to get more information on that avenue?
Those projects have been done by other installers and by OEM accounts, and your distributor or our applications engineers can help you guide through some of the, I guess some of the design decisions, you'd say. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. One last question: is the Radian up to 3-phase yet?
The Radian 3-phase will be essentially the end of the year, end of next year. We are just shipping our European Radian, which is 3-phase, and now we're moving on to the North American. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. It's good talking to you again, Phil.
Likewise. All right. Let's see. There were other folks who had a question. You can raise your hand. Right. So I'm reading through the other questions. You said the Radian is available in 3-phase for export, and yes, the GS7048E is just shipping and will be available. It is being first released in overseas for international customers so that they can get it first, obviously. So that's a 230-volt 50 hertz model. There was a question, let me see, Robert Tarswell has his hand right up. I'm going to unmute the phone for Robert. Robert, can you hear us? Okay. Robert, we've unmuted you. All right. Well, looks like maybe your phone isn't on, so. Okay. Well, there's a number of questions here that folks have asked. We'll try to put together a summary answer and then post that, and distribute it to people who had entered their email address. We'll also be posting a recording of these trainings to our website. We have to process it and get it posted, so give us a little bit of patience, but we'll have that up on our resources tab in the near future. But I really appreciate everyone's time and attention today to spend some time learning about the OutBack Power communication portfolio. Paul, any last words? So with that, I think we'll let everyone off the line. And again, we appreciate the time, and thank you for attending OutBack's training.